the cloud. So just know that if you say something, like if with your voice may be heard on this recording. So just be aware of that. Your face will never be seen. If you put a question, if you want to ask a question, but you don't want your voice to be heard, just put the question in the chat and we'll address it there. Okay. Thank you, Damien. All right, so we will post the recording of this video later today after I have a chance to edit that and just put that little black rectangle in there. All right. So this is what we're doing today. We are discussing the Gettysburg Address, and we want to address those questions specifically. So what I had asked you to do, and I think at this point probably a good idea just to exit out of this, and just take us right here to Google Classroom. And I will go to actually a history class in Google Classroom. So if we take a look at the classwork and we take a look at those Gettysburg Address resources, these are the resources that I shared with you last night. This is what I asked you to do. So we're going to be considering these three questions right here. I'm going to zoom right in here. These three questions is what we're looking at. Number one, what was the purpose of the Gettysburg Address? Number two, was it considered a success or a failure at the time Lincoln gave this speech? And then number three, why is this, and that's the essential question, the most famous, the most celebrated, and most memorized speech in American history? This was the reading that I had asked you to do, like for everybody to do, please. This one right here. And then these are three videos that are optional, but really could help you. And again, you see they're only 3 minutes, 2 minutes, that can help you, help give you a more full, rich understanding of the Gettysburg Address. So let's start off with number one. What was the purpose of the Gettysburg Address? And I suppose, Mr. Hahn, before we jump right into this question and start having students like talk to us about this, I think it's important for us to just have a little bit of background, right?
Yes.
So this is, and again, you could do, well, you were supposed to do this reading, but let me just kind of give you the thumbnail sketch so that whether you did the reading or not, you have an understanding of what's going on here. So the Battle of Gettysburg, which we learned about from Mr. Hahn in our last class, took place July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863. This is what's considered what historians call the high water mark of the Civil War. In other words, this is the point at which, this was like the turning point. Other historians call it the watershed moment in the Civil War, the time when, up until that point, it was very, very, very possible that the South was going to win, the Confederacy was going to win, and the Union was going to lose. In other words, it looked very possible because Robert E. Lee was a really, really good general, and the South was super motivated. They really wanted to leave and start their own country. So it looked for a long time like the South was going to win. Lee, if you remember from our last class, Mr. Hahn's lesson, Lee tried to invade the North the first time at the Battle of Antietam in Maryland, and he failed. And he withdrew back to the South, won some more victories back down in Virginia against the North. So it was still looking like from the end of the summer 1862 into the winter and spring. They really don't fight many battles in the winter during this time for much of human history just because of the weather. But moving into the spring and then early summer, it's not looking good for the Union. And the longer the war takes, the longer people get frustrated, the longer people lose interest. You may be seeing that now in our current state of affairs, right? Like if you think of this whole coronavirus thing, at the very beginning, most Americans were pretty on board with social distancing, with, you know, we need to stay in our homes, we need to wear protective gear, businesses need to shut down, schools need to shut down. Like first 2-3 weeks, everybody was on board with that, right? Like everybody was supportive. But as you have maybe seen from friends, from family, from the news, from social media, people are starting to get restless. People are starting to get upset, right? Because people are hurting economically. People are getting tired of like having to stay cooped up in their homes. People want to go out and see their friends and their family again. So there's a growing level of frustration. And I think in the Union, in the North, during the time of the Civil War, during those first couple of years, realize that we've been in quarantine for the last 2 months. We're talking about a war that had dragged on for 2 years. That's costing a lot of money, that is costing American lives. And I think there were a lot of people in the North who were like, you know what? if these people in the South, if they just want to go, then let them go. Like they clearly, like they're going to do their thing. They're killing us for it. So why not just let them go? So there's a growing frustration in the North that it feels like we're losing. It feels like we're losing this war. We're losing a lot of money. We're losing a lot of lives. Just let them go. Just let the war be over and let them go. This is what's called a war of attrition, where you just fight long enough for the other side to give up. And the North, I think in some respects, was close to giving up. The Battle of Gettysburg, when Lee invades the North for the last time, he invades Pennsylvania. His thought is, you know what, if I can win a battle in Pennsylvania, then maybe, because this was on like farmland in Pennsylvania, right? Maybe I can go on and capture Philadelphia. That would be a huge blow to the North, or maybe even swing down and capture Washington, D.C., or maybe even go all the way up to New York City. If you capture one big city in the North, then this whole war could be over, and the North would be like, you know what, forget it, just go. Just leave, just go. So this is a critical battle for the North. This is a critical battle for Abraham Lincoln. And it turns out that Gettysburg ends up being a victory. It was a costly mistake for the North. It was a costly mistake for General Lee, for the Confederacy. He never will invade the North again. And that, along with the Battle of Vicksburg, those are the two, because, you know, Gettysburg is July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and the siege of Vicksburg on the Mississippi River, that was July 4th. So those two things right there in the summer of 1863, that's what turns the tide for the Union. That's when the North starts to feel like, you know what? Yeah, maybe we got this. Maybe we now see the beginning of the end. We see it on the other side. We can see victory. We can see this coming to an end. We can see us coming out of this on top. And so we're gonna, like, we got this. This battle gives us hope. So Abraham Lincoln, here he is. There are thousands, tens of thousands of Americans who died in this one battle alone, and hundreds of thousands of Americans who have died total on both sides, North and South. And Lincoln has been asked to go to this cemetery in Pennsylvania because it takes a long time to round up tens of thousands of bodies, dead bodies, lying all over this farmland, dig proper graves for them, and bury them.
5 months.
Yes. Yeah. The battle was in July, August, September, October, November. So it's literally months after the battle is ended. And they decide, the War Department, the United States government decides, you know what, we need to have a ceremony to commemorate the men who lost their lives at this battle, the tens of thousands of people, men who lost their lives here at this site. And at first, they weren't even going to invite President Abraham Lincoln. He was an afterthought. The organizers of the event, they invited former Massachusetts Governor Edward Everett, who ended up giving a 2-hour speech. A 2-hour speech. We get restless if we watch YouTube for more than like 10 minutes. So imagine sitting through a 2-hour speech, right? Eventually, they did decide, you know what, it's probably appropriate to invite the President of the United States, and so then he gives the speech, and the photographers, they barely had time. If you watch I think it's the Ken Burns video that I shared with you, it talks about how he spoke for such a short amount of time. Edward Everett spoke for 2 hours, and Lincoln spoke for 2 minutes. The photographer barely even had enough time, because it's old-time cameras, right? Barely even had enough time to set up his camera. Abraham Lincoln was already going back and sitting down by the time the photographer had his camera all set up. So literally the only photo that we have of Abraham Lincoln was actually of him going back and sitting down. This right here, of course, is not a photo. This is just a drawing of Lincoln at the Gettysburg Cemetery. Let's go back here. And so, let me go here now. And so Lincoln has to think of these words. Let me zoom in. And he has to think, you know what, how can I possibly give meaning to what has happened here? And so this is the text. I'll go over this with you. 70 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. So this first part right here, fourscore, what is a score? Who got this from the reading or from the videos, or who just knows it from math? Yeah, Catherine?
A score is 20.
It's 20, right? It's just an old it's like a dozen is 12, a score is 20. So good job to everybody else in the chat who's saying 20. So basically he's saying 87 years ago, our fathers, our founding fathers, right? The founders of our country brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. 87 years ago, so if you do the math, 1863 minus 87, that year is going to be 1776, the year that the Declaration of Independence was signed. So 87 years ago, we created this document and we started a country where we said, as our number one founding principle, that all men are created equal. And so that's his introduction. That's where he starts. Now we are engaged in a great civil war. He's saying this is where we are right now in our lives. We are in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, the one that we started back in 1776, or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. In other words, can a country that was founded on the principle all men are created equal, can it survive? Exactly, Emily. Can it survive? We are met on a great battlefield of that war, the Gettysburg battlefield. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field. So they took, it's not, the whole battlefield is massive. I've visited it several times. It's huge. It's hundreds and hundreds of acres. And so they took a portion of it, a few acres, as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that nation might live. We took a portion of it and we're setting it aside as a cemetery. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. In other words, it makes sense that these men died here at this battlefield, so we're going to make a special place for them here as their final resting place, for their graves, for these, for the bodies of the deceased who died here for their country. But then he goes on and he's starting to talk about the purpose. He's starting to talk about the why. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. Hallow. Can anyone tell me what this word hallow or what this word consecrate means? You can raise your hand or you can put it in the chat. To consecrate, if anyone is familiar with this term from maybe like a church service or any other like a religious service that you've been
Noah's
to.
got it, sir.
Yeah. So Noah says to make holy. Emily says to make it sacred. All Hallows Eve, Halloween. All Hallows Eve is like it's an honoring of the dead, right? So, in other words, he's saying we can't just by the words that we say, just by having the ceremony, we cannot make this ground holy. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. In other words, we politicians, these people up here making speeches, we can, yada, yada, yada. A priest can go and like do their thing and maybe bless this ground, or a minister. But the real people who made this ground holy, who made it sacred, are the ones who sacrificed their lives here. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. And the ironic part about that, you think about this line right here. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here. We're learning about this speech 100, how long is it? 155 years later?
Something like that, sir.
Thank you. I'm not, my math is not as fuzzy right now. So it's funny that Lincoln is so humble. Abraham Lincoln is such a humble man. He could get up on the stage and say, I'm an amazing public speaker. Listen to me. Listen to how amazing my words are. But he doesn't say that. Instead, he goes the opposite direction. And he says, you know what? History won't even remember my words. He's not even going to remember the speech that I'm giving. But what I hope they remember is what they did here, the sacrifice that these soldiers made. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work, which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. So now he's starting to give the call to action. In other words, these men here have already died, and they have unfinished work. So the question is, what is their unfinished work? What is the work that these soldiers, what was the purpose? Why did these soldiers die here at this location? What is their unfinished work? What is their purpose? Any thoughts? I'm going to take a sip of my cinnamon tea while you're thinking. So Emily is saying he wants others to continue what they started, to avenge them. And avenge, it has, avenge, that word kind of has a little bit of, I don't know if Lincoln is thinking that in those terms about like avenge or revenge. Ali St. John says to not have slavery. And why does Ali say to not have slavery? Why is that the unfinished work that these soldiers here have been working toward? And Sebastian says their purpose is to preserve the nation, and people have come along for it. Damien says to continue to fight to make a better nation. And Ali says that was the whole point of the war. And Emily says to win the war. So I don't think it's just one answer. I'm hearing really good answers. I'm hearing the first one, Ali saying to end slavery. That's their purpose. Anne is saying to preserve the nation. That's the purpose. Damien is saying to fight for a better nation. Let's see if we can find what Lincoln thinks is the purpose as we continue here. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. This starts to get a little complicated. His language starts to get a little complicated here. He's saying we need to decide today, here and now, the people who are here, the people who are still living, we need to draw devotion. Like we need to take energy and we need to take motivation from their sacrifice. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. What does it mean to do something in vain?
Go, Catherine.
Yeah, Catherine.
To do something in vain is to do something but not have it make an impact. To have things just go back to the way they were previously.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you do something in vain, it means just like what Anne said, it's wasteful. To do something for no reason, Ali says. Braxton says with no purpose. So in other words, we need to make sure that the men who died here did not die for no purpose. We need to make sure that their deaths had purpose, that their deaths had meaning. And now here it is. Now here's where Lincoln hits us with the purpose. This is why they died. This highlighted part right here, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. So here's the last part right here. It's a short speech. Here's that last part right here. He's explaining his purpose. This is why these men died. That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Emily says America would lose its meaning and its values if they continued slavery, and its ideals would be hypocritical. What do you think of that? I like that. What do you think of that? What else do you have to say? Raise your hand or put it in the chat. What is Lincoln saying is the purpose of this war and the reason why these men died? I read a book. I read an entire book on the Gettysburg Address. It's called Lincoln at Gettysburg. And the author, Gary Wills, he said this. He used this metaphor. You know, you remember what a metaphor is, right? It's not like a real thing. It's something that represents something else. So this is the metaphor that he used. I want you to listen to it and think of what you think it means. Gary Wills said that the American people in 1863 had an understanding of what the Declaration of Independence meant. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, right? And every American had an idea of what they thought that meant in their back pocket. So imagine this like piece of paper, metaphorical piece of paper, that every American has in their back pocket with the Declaration of Independence and what they think that that declaration means up to that time. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Originally, when the founders created the Declaration, created our country, when they said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, what did they really mean? Raise your hand or put it in the chat. Emily says all male whites. And why do we think that? Why do we think that when Thomas Jefferson wrote the words and when all of those men at the Continental Congress approved them, all landowning Caucasian men is another comment? Yeah. So in 1776, when the Declaration of Independence was written and we say all men are created equal, that was the understanding that everyone had. Well, you had to be white, you had to be male, you had to own land, you had to be free, right? So this is what Gary Wills, the author of Lincoln at Gettysburg, says. He says that in the course of this 2-minute speech, Abraham Lincoln took the old understanding that everyone had of the Declaration of Independence out of their back pocket and quietly slipped in a new understanding, a new interpretation. It's as though the Declaration of Independence had been reinterpreted for every American. And I thought that that was an interesting interpretation. Do you agree or disagree? What are your thoughts on that? That Abraham Lincoln very, very slyly, very quietly, very unassumingly replaces the understanding that we have of the Declaration of Independence. Damien says it's a weird metaphor, but it makes sense. Alex Ripa agrees. All right. Well, I know some of you just want to get these questions answered. You can see here. So I do want to transition to that, and I thank you for listening to my story on the Gettysburg Address. I love the story of the Gettysburg Address. Let's go ahead, Mr. Hahn. Do you now see the study guide on here? Okay. So let's answer some of these questions here. And Mr. Hahn, do you want me to share? Are you willing to take some notes on this, Mr. Hahn?
Yes, sir, I can. Give me 1 second.
Okay. Okay. So thank you. He's on it. Dang, Mr. Hahn, you're good. So question number 11, what was the purpose of the Gettysburg Address? Let's start off with that. Let's start off with the purpose. What was the purpose of the Gettysburg Address? Raise your hand, talk to us, put it in the chat. What was the purpose? And Sebastian, what's the purpose?
Well, I would say it's to prevent further war among the nation and keeping it from separating, and to promote equal rights for not only all Americans, but for Black people, and shared rights.
Okay, you're giving us a lot to think about. So I heard. Yeah. What was the first part you said again, Anne?
It's to prevent further war among the nation, to keep it from separating.
Okay, so in other words, you're saying that his purpose in giving the speech was to bring peace to the nation.
Yes.
Like to bring everybody back together. Okay, and then the second purpose was to say that this war was about ending slavery. Is that kind of a good summary of the second part?
Yeah.
Okay. Emily in the chat says the purpose of the Gettysburg Address was to honor the countless men who died in the battlefield. Yes, and I think this speech has multiple meanings, right? Multiple purposes. Honor the countless men who died in the battlefield. Motivate the soldiers to keep fighting because they were fighting for freedom. So in other words, giving the soldiers of the North who are putting their lives at risk, giving them a purpose, giving them a reason for doing what they're doing, for continuing to do what they do. I want to go back here. His purpose, I think Lincoln puts his purpose right here in the last line of the speech. Yeah, Nathan asks, did they give the speech, this address during the war? This is still while the war is going on, Nathan. Yes. The war, the battle at Gettysburg was in July of 1863. The speech he gave, the cemetery dedication, was in November of 1863. The war won't actually end until April of 1865. So the war is still happening, yes. Here it is right here. Take a look at this one more time. That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. He mentions that first. What does it mean for the nation to have a new birth of freedom? Yeah, Janessa.
I think for a new rebirth of freedom, I lost my train of thought. Hold on. Never mind. I forgot what I was gonna say.
That's okay. Anne, go ahead. Anne Sebastian.
Oh, I said it in the chat, but it's more of a new interpretation of freedom.
Okay. So in other words, a new interpretation of freedom, the original interpretation of freedom in 1776 was like no taxation without representation, right? Freedom from the British, freedom from tyranny, freedom from, a king. That was our original freedom that we were fighting for in the American Revolution. But we're fighting for a new birth of freedom in the Civil War. We're fighting for the freedom of all people in the Civil War. Janessa, was there something else you wanted to share?
Maybe like a new way of all people having the same equal rights and having the same freedom, and a new way of being united as a country.
I like that too. I have a private comment here in the chat that says a new idea of freedom. Before, the idea of freedom was for all landowning Caucasian men. Now it was for all men and women, no matter their race or social or economic class. Now, Shivani, interesting that you say women. Do you think Lincoln here was trying to throw in, because the main focus of the Civil War was slavery, right? But do you think he was also trying to throw in like a nod to women's rights as well? And Damien says, can you write private comments? Yes, you can write private comments to me. If you're in the chat and you click on the little drop-down menu, then you can send, I don't know if you can send private comments to everyone, or if you can just send private comments to the host and the co-host.
You can send private comments to everyone, but those private comments still show up to us. So.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if I turned that on or off. All right, cool. Okay, so a new birth of freedom, ending slavery, and maybe also throwing in women's rights in there as well. That's something that doesn't get talked about very much. So that's an interesting thought. And that government of the people, by the people, for the people. In other words, this is our democracy. This is the United States. We created a government that was based on the people, created by the people, and created for the people, shall not perish from the earth. What does the word perish mean? The word perish means to go away, right? To go away, to die. Janessa, is that what you're going to say?
Yeah.
Yes. In other words, I know people were asking me to go back to the document. I'm going to go here really quickly. Here's the reason why I'm writing the why I'm writing the Gettysburg Address. Why we're fighting this war, to have a new birth of freedom for all Americans, and so this country might live on. this great experiment, this nation that we are creating that is of the people and by the people and for the people. This is the most amazing experiment that has ever been created in the history of the world. And we need it to continue. We can't have this country fall apart. Okay. Was it considered a success or failure at the time Lincoln gave this speech? This is something we can address quickly. Was it considered a success or failure? Based on what you read and based on the videos that you watched, was it considered a success or failure, Anne?
I would say yes, because although people had
Wait, hold
mixed
on.
opinions.
Back up. Success or failure, you said yes. So was it considered
It's a
mostly a success or mostly a failure?
Yes, it's a success.
Okay, and then explain why.
Okay, so although people had mixed opinions about it, it brought more awareness than ever, even though many people had addressed it. Like, I feel like this was the moment where people actually comprehended what was going on. And then the ending result did support Lincoln's thoughts and hopes of the speech.
Okay. Any other thoughts from anyone else? Emily says it was very inspiring. Janessa.
I think it was a success because at the time people were hurting because of this huge battle that had happened. And I think in a way it gave people comfort and reassurance of what we could be doing better to have a better country to, for everybody's freedom. And so everybody could be happy and not constantly be worrying about things that people shouldn't have to be worrying about.
Okay. I from what I've read, because like I said, I've studied this speech quite a bit. The people in the audience initially were like, "Wait, what? That's it?" Like they were so stunned because again, the most famous speech giver of the time, the most famous orator in the United States at that time was former governor of Massachusetts, Edward Everett. He was a beautiful public speaker. He just gave such flowery, beautiful, used amazing language, was like the most well-known at that time. And he spoke for 2 hours and everybody was expecting, okay, Lincoln's going to give a big, long speech too. And so initially they were, Lucas says they were confused because the speech was so short. Everybody in the audience was like, wait, that's it? And remember, there are no microphones back then, right? So here is a crowd of hundreds. I don't know about thousands, but hundreds were there. And they're kind of like, they're trying to strain to listen. And they really, a lot of them, I don't think got it. And for most people in the audience at that time, I think the speech fell flat. Edward Everett, though, who was sitting at, on the podium, like up on the stage, he approached Lincoln afterwards and he said, and I think you may have read this somewhere in the reading, he says, "Mr. President, I wish that I could have said as much in 2 hours that you said in 2 minutes. I wish I could have said as much in 2 hours that you said in 2 minutes." In other words, Edward Everett, the best public speaker in America in the 1860s, basically told Lincoln, "You did a better job than I did. And I spoke for 2 hours and you were able to sum up this war in just 2 minutes. You did a better job than I did." So I thought that was interesting as well. Later on, as Americans were reading his speech in the newspapers, and they actually had a chance to digest it and discuss it and talk about it, I think that's when the speech was considered more successful. But at the beginning, I don't think it was considered as successful. Mr. Hahn, you're doing a great job of taking notes, so thank you. All right, and we have one more question. Nathan asks, so why was it a failure for Democrat? Well,
Democrats, they said that it wasn't enough. It was only a 2-minute speech in comparison to the 2 hours that Edward Everett gave. So they felt like, oh no, President Lincoln doesn't care about our dead because he only spoke about them for 2 minutes. Meanwhile, this gentleman over here spoke about them for 2 hours. So
Well, this is a good thing to keep in mind also that Republicans and Democrats, they bash each other today.
mm-hmm.
You can open up, you can check out the news, and you can see Republicans and Democrats criticizing each other all the time. That still happened back then, and their politics still existed back then. There was Lincoln's former general, George McClellan. He actually ran against Lincoln as a Democrat in the presidential election of 1864. So there were still, Lincoln, for as much as we put him in statues and on signs, and we consider him such a great president today. At the time, Lincoln was still a polarizing figure. There were some people who loved President Abraham Lincoln, and a lot of people who hated President Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was a Republican, so there were a lot of Democrats who disliked him. Okay. The speech by the lawyer, the speech by the former governor, Edward Everett, was 2 hours. It was 2 hours. Lincoln's speech was 2 minutes. Okay, so let's now get to this final question here. Why is this the most famous, the most celebrated, and the most memorized speech in American history? Why do you think we're spending an entire class period just discussing this one speech? And it's not just happening, Emily, I see your hand. It's not just happening like in our class. This speech is being studied all over the country by 8th graders and 11th graders who also study U.S. history. It is studied by adults, by historians. This speech has been, like I said, literally, I read an entire book just on this one speech. And there are hundreds of books that have been written on the topic. Emily, what do you think?
Wait, I have a question. So wait, was it a success or was it a failure? Because I thought it was a success, but then you said I got mixed signals.
Well, I think at the time it was received with a mixed review. I would say that most Americans today, looking back through the lens of history, I think most Americans today go, dang, that was a good speech. I think back then there were some haters who were like, you only spoke for 2 minutes, jerk. You don't care. You don't care about the dead. You don't care about this war, jerk. Because politicians are always going to have their haters. And so there were mixed reviews at first. And I would say, honestly, Emily, I would say at the speech, like at the actual dedication ceremony, I would say the reception was either neutral, confused, or negative. Because at first, I think the people who were listening to the speech were just thinking, you know what, a speech has to be long for it to be good.
So it was more of a failure at the time than a success, but then later like a success?
I think as the American public read the speech in newspapers, they had a chance to process it. They had a chance to really understand what it was all about. I think that's when they really got the impact. They got how important this was.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. The article says that opinion was generally divided along political lines, with Republican journalists praising the speech as heartfelt classic piece of oratory, and Democratic journalists deriding it, calling the speech inadequate, meaning it wasn't long enough, it wasn't enough, it was only 2 minutes, and also inappropriate, not appropriate for the momentous occasion of honoring the dead at the Battle of Gettysburg. So
well, and again, I think that's consistent with, if President Trump gives a speech today, then I would think that in general, CNN is probably going to go, there was a lot of stuff that he missed, a lot of, he lied about this, and he was false on this and this, because CNN tends to lean a little bit more liberal, more towards Democrats. Whereas if President Trump were to give that same speech and Fox News were to analyze it, I think Fox News would say, oh, he gave a heroic, wonderful, amazing speech. It's I think it's you see a lot of echoes of the past in today's politics and today's media.
Mm-hmm.
Nathan, what if he had made it 2 hours long? I don't know. That's a really good question. Would it have had the same outcome? Would it have had the same impact? Gosh, Nathan, I don't think we would be able to sit through 2 hours of a lesson with me just reading you a 2 hour speech. So I would say no. I would say part of the impact, part of what made the Gettysburg Address so impactful was the fact that he said so much using so few words. And who won the election of 1864? That was Abraham Lincoln. He won re-election. Yeah. Have we answered the question yet, Mr. Hahn? Why is this the most
No, we
famous,
have not.
the most celebrated, the most memorized? Emily says short and sweet. Yep.
We tried to get started on that one, but somebody brought us back to the
What?
previous question.
Are you saying that somebody got sidetracked, Mr. Hahn?
We all. I'm not saying somebody, sir. We all did.
Nathan, we haven't had the election yet. This year's election is in November. Okay. Let's see if we can answer question 12. Who wants to share? And Sebastian, go for it.
Okay, so I guess the fact that it was less than 2 minutes was remarkable itself. And the fact that he said a lot more in just his words than everything that was going on was really powerful to everyone. And he also said that people won't remember it. I felt like since he said that, people remembered it, just as an irony.
Reverse psychology.
But also the message that he gave was really important for our nation, because without it, we wouldn't really be the same.
What impact do you think this speech had? Why is it so celebrated? Emily says it made people think. I think so. If you are living in the North at this time, living in the Union, how do you, what does this speech mean to you? If you're hearing, this is a time of war, and you've had maybe a father die, or a brother die, or a cousin die, or maybe you've had multiple family members die in this war already, what does it mean to you to hear Abraham Lincoln say these words, or to read these words later in a in a newspaper? Nathan says it was really motivational. Emily says it was inspiring. It made people want to keep fighting for the fallen soldiers and to fight for freedom. Anne says New Hope. That makes me think of Star Wars.
Mm.
When it comes to anything, does it make a difference if you know why you're doing something? Whether it's taking a class, I don't know, doing chores around your house, doing an assignment, something involved like for like a sports, like a practice or something. Like, does it make sense? Are you more motivated when you know why? When you know why you're doing something? I see a couple of yeses. I think this, for the Union, I think for the people in the North, I think this speech, and this is one of the reasons why the president matters. The words that the president says matter. People listen. People listened back then in 1863. I think people listen, during this whole coronavirus crisis, people really listen to what President Trump is saying. They're following his every word. They're looking to his leadership. They're looking to his guidance. The president's words matter because the president tells us this is why we're doing what we're doing. Have hope. This is the tough time, but we're gonna make it through. This is the purpose for why we're doing this. Nathan said, did it inspire people in the South? And who would be the leader of the South if Lincoln was working with the North? Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy. They considered themselves to be a separate country at that time. So the man who was the president of the South, the Confederacy, that was Jefferson Davis. And did it inspire people in the South? I don't know. It's a good question. Do you think the Gettysburg Address had the opposite effect for the people in the South? Did they think, oh, well, if you guys are fighting to end slavery, then I'm going to fight to keep slavery? Because you have to think about this. Emily says it probably inspired the South to fight back. Think about this. Think back to that the pyramid. Remember the pyramid? The slavery, what am I trying to call it? The Southern class
The Southern
pyramid.
class pyramid, yes.
Southern class pyramid. What percentage Southern class? See if I can get it. Oh, hey, Mr. Hahn, look. When I do a Google image search, look at the first one to pop up. This is my slide. This is my slide that somebody else stole and is now hosting on slideplayer.com. Open image in new tab. What percentage of the people living in the South actually owned lots of slaves? I'll give you a hint. These are the ones who owned lots of slaves. The planter elite. Only 8% of the people living in the South actually owned, like, I don't know, more than like 3 or more slaves. These small farmers here, they might have owned like 0 to 2, maybe. But these are the ones who, like, the planter elite, the upper class, they're the ones who own most of the slaves. So they're the ones who would have the most to lose if slavery ended. Most to lose economically anyway, if slavery ended. And if President Abraham Lincoln is now saying, you know what, I'm going to make this real simple. This war is about ending slavery. This war is about giving freedom to all people. If you are part of this Southern class pyramid, if you're part of the biggest group, the biggest group of soldiers, where most of the soldiers were coming from the South, right here, poor whites, the ones who didn't own any slaves at all. And if Abraham Lincoln is saying to everyone, saying to the whole nation, this war is about ending slavery, about ending the institution of slavery. If you are one of these poor whites living in the South during this time, how do you react to that? How do you react to someone coming right out and saying, you know what, this is what this war is about. We're trying to create equality for everybody. Emily's saying this Civil War is kind of like livelihood versus actual lives. What does that mean, Emily? What's that, Mr. Hahn?
I think kind of on that one. Yeah, definitely.
Well, I meant like livelihood, like how they get their money versus like actual people.
Okay. All right. Anne says they would be convinced. Explain that to me, Anne.
I feel like they would like see what was really going on, because I feel like being in this pyramid, they would only look up to the elites and doing whatever they told them. So when the president flat out said, this is why we're doing this, I feel like they would have realized what was going on, and they would have like started like rebelling almost to these elites, because morally, what Abraham Lincoln was saying really probably touched them.
Well, and so if you're, and it's of course it's much more complicated than this, but if you are part of this group right here and you are putting your life on the line to basically protect the property of these people right here, how, does that change your level of motivation? If you realize, like, if the light bulb goes off, hey, wait a minute, I could potentially lose my life just so that these people could have a comfortable way of life, then you start to think, well, maybe I don't know about this anymore. I'm not sure. So It's something interesting to think about. Any other thoughts? There's no one single answer for this. So really for this question number 12 right here, why is this the most famous, the most celebrated? You're going to come up with an answer based on what you have learned today. And if you need to go back and watch a little bit more, read a little bit more, go ahead and do that. But I kind of want to wrap this up now and see if there are any other questions or anything else you want to share. Janessa, go ahead.
I have a quick question. How long do these answers need to be? Do they need to be really long, or can they be like a couple sentences longer?
I think a couple sentences. Yeah, 2, 3, 4 sentences I think is fine for sure. I just want to make sure that you understand it. Yeah, Audrey, what's up?
I have a question. So like before the test, are you gonna have like a Zoom just like going over the study guide?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked. So Audrey, what's going to happen is, so we're going to have the test on Monday, June 1st. And so on the previous Wednesday, the class before, our Zoom is like literally legit just going to be going over all these answers here, or the ones that you have questions about, right? Like I'm not going to spend a ton of time answering questions on stuff you already know, but helping you with the whole study guide. And then whatever we don't get to, or if you want to dive deeper a little bit into something, Audrey, then the YouTube live that we're going to do the night before the test, we'll dive deeper into that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great question. Emily Swift, what's up?
On the battles like of the Civil War, I put a lot of like. Is it okay if I just like take the information from the slides and like kind of word it my own words, or do you want it to be?
That's
Yeah,
fine.
absolutely.
Original.
Take that information, put it in your own words. Yes.
Okay.
I will forewarn everybody though, if you copy and paste my words and if you just copy my words, which by the way, those are my words. I wrote those slides, paste them into the battles of the Civil War. I will not give you points. That will be theft. That will be plagiarism. Thievery is not tolerated by Mr. Hahn.
Yes. So put it in your own words.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, here's what I'm going to do then, Mr. Hahn, is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop the recording now. Stop my recording. I need to find my thing where I can stop my recording. Oh, there we go. Stop recording. Okay. And folks, at this time, if you have, well, first of all, I'm going to say thank you for joining us. This is my favorite speech, my favorite president. So I appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much. And please come back on Wednesday, because on Wednesday, I don't even remember what we're learning about Mr. Hahn on Wednesday. What is it, Mr. Hahn, on Wednesday?
Oh, geez, what was it? Hang on, I have it right here somewhere.
Is it like the assassination? Are we to that point yet?
I think it might be.
Yes. Oh my good. Oh no. Wait. It's African Americans in the Civil War.
Ah, there we go.
Yes. Oh, so good. Oh, you're gonna love it. African Americans in the Civil War. We'll talk about the Massachusetts 54th. We'll talk about glory. We'll talk. It's so good. So I love this. I love the Civil War. I love Lincoln. And I love you guys. Thank you so much. If you have questions, stick around. Otherwise, this is the point where I won't have my feelings hurt if you leave. And thank you. And great to see you.
I will.
All right. We'll see who's going to stick around, ask some additional questions. Taylor, are you still there? Oh, yeah, Taylor. Taylor, the study guide is due the day of the test.
So are we supposed to be still recording, or?
I thought that I stopped recording.
It's still recording for both of us.
Stop recording.
Stop recording.